Yet another Doctors Without Borders hospital has been destroyed by airstrike in Aleppo, Syria. Airstrikes and artillery killed more than 60 people in the past 24 hours. This is just in the city of Aleppo, the largest city in Syria. This includes dozens at the hospital in a rebel-held neighborhood. One of those killed was the last pediatrician at the hospital. And so obviously very tragic there. Hospital staff at the scene said one blast directly hit the building, reducing it to rubble, according to Medecins Sans Frontières statement. And this is all amidst a wave of violence that has renewed in Syria, particularly in Aleppo. There had been a period of relative peace for some time, but about 200 civilians have been killed in the past week in Syria, nearly half of them around Aleppo. So the violence is back in full force. So we're going to have a little bit of information about what we know and what we don't know about who was responsible for this, but what's your immediate reaction, Anna?
So we, of course, are waiting for a lot of details as to who did the airstrike. We're not 100% confirmed that this was a U.S.-led airstrike, but I do know from past experiences that these Doctors Without Borders hospitals have been bombed on accident due to U.S. airstrikes and due to faulty intel. And the faulty intel leads to all sorts of actions that kill innocent civilians and then leads to a lot of hostility toward the United States. So it could be faulty intel that leads to drone strikes or signature strikes. But in this case, they're airstrikes that are killing doctors. In this particular hospital, there was only one pediatric doctor left, and he was killed.
Yeah.
So it's a devastating story, and I hate speculating on something as serious as this, but if I were to speculate, I would say that it's likely it was a U.S. airstrike, but I don't know. We don't know. So I want to be absolutely clear about that.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's a terrible pattern. Some people believe that these hospitals are being targeted by one force or another. Some people believe that the U.S. is going out of their way to destroy these hospitals. Others think that unreliable sources are providing information to them. Not necessarily in this case, but in the two previous cases where an MSF hospital was destroyed. And so there's a lot of suspicion, a lot of fear, as there should be as the conflict goes on. And this is a reminder to us, whether it ends up that it was the U.S. or one of the other many parties involved in this conflict, that when you don't send in troops and you just do airstrikes, that doesn't mean that you're not at war. And it doesn't mean that there aren't near constant tragedies for the people living in that area. We like to think that, oh, it's hands off. We don't have to worry like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan originally. But it can be absolutely brutal what ends up happening there. So let's try to narrow down who it might have been. There's a lot of sides in this conflict. A Damascus-based Syrian military official denied that the government had hit the hospital. The official spoke on condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to talk to the media. So apparently it was not the actual Syrian government. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Major General Igor Konashenikov said he denied bombing any hospitals in Aleppo, saying its aircraft had not flown any missions in the region for several days. And supposedly, several weeks ago, their mission in Syria had concluded, although we have reason to believe that it goes on in that region. So the Russians didn't do it. Colonel Steve Warren, the spokesman for the U.S.-led campaign against ISIS in Syria, said fighter jets from the international coalition have not carried out any airstrikes in Aleppo in the past 24 hours. So apparently the U.S. also didn't do it, nor has anyone in our international coalition. So theoretically, if those three groups are being honest, and I have reason to believe that all three could lie, increasing depending on which one you're talking about, then that leaves ISIS or a splinter rebel group. Now this is in a rebel-held area. It's a hospital presumably servicing rebels in that area. So it seems less likely that they would be one of the ones who would have destroyed them. But I'm glad that you brought up the previous airstrikes because we did have, suspiciously, a development on that today as the third MSF hospital is hit. The Pentagon plans to announce just tomorrow that up to 16 members of the military will be disciplined for their role in the October airstrike against a hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, that killed as many as 42 people. None of the military personnel involved are expected to face criminal charges, but a top special operations commander is likely to be fired from his job, one of the officials told CNN. So that was one of the more devastating destructions of a Doctors Without Borders hospital. And even then, it doesn't lead to anyone going to jail, even temporarily.
Yeah, there's no criminal charges. for the fact that all of these innocent people were killed in a hospital.
Yeah.
And so not only do our actions lead to that hostility that I was alluding to earlier, it also, the lack of consequences for our actions, I think, leads to even more hostility. So look, the thing that I want to do more than anything is make sure that innocent civilians and doctors and people who aren't doing anything wrong, I want to protect them, and I want to ensure that they don't get hurt or get killed, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I want to make sure that we really rethink our foreign policy strategy. Currently, what we're doing with foreign policy is very transparent and very clear. We want perpetual war, right? It feeds into that military-industrial complex. People make a lot of money off being in perpetual war. But at the same time, it's having serious ramifications, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. You know, with terrorist attacks in European countries, with, you know, people feeling like they need to join terrorist organizations like ISIS. We need to rethink it. We need to save the lives of innocent human beings, and we need to stop bombing things without knowing, without a shadow of a doubt, that we're targeting the right people.
Yeah, and knowing that the people who are giving us the reports about who supposedly is in these are in these buildings are reliable, that we can actually rely on them. So in the case of the 16 members of the military in the Kunduz incident, look, the military says that they were either misled about who was operating in the hospital, or that in fact the enemy was actually in there, regardless of what ended up being the case. If that's the case, then of course you don't want the airmen involved in it to go to jail. They're doing their job. It's a job that results in people dying, and it's a job that constantly risks things like this going on, and they need to be able to do their jobs. But the storyline underlying it, it's questionable, and this is exactly why we should be far, far more hesitant to get involved in these sorts of conflicts.
Yes.
I mean, almost every Republican running for the nomination says, oh yeah, of course we got to have a gigantic no-fly zone, as if a no-fly zone can exist without a massive number of soldiers to support it. Even Hillary Clinton, she's gonna largely continue Barack Obama's strategy in Syria, and we know historically that she's more of a hawk, more prone to use military force. Well, even if that doesn't mean sending in 10 or 50 or 100,000 American troops, situations like this will continue so long as we're involved there. And so we don't know yet in the most recent case who's responsible, if it's the U.S. once again, or if it's Russia or the Syrian government perhaps. But either way, the people who end up suffering are the normal innocent people of Syria.